PUBG Mobile, one of the most dominant and culturally defining games of the last decade, with a story that feels less like a simple rise and fall and more like a complete transformation of what gaming even means in the modern era. Within just a few short years, PUBG went from a raw, experimental idea to a global phenomenon that reshaped the entire industry, pulling in hundreds of millions of players, creating careers out of thin air, and turning ordinary smartphones into battlegrounds where anyone from any corner of the world could compete. But at the same time, it also became one of the most debated games in history, criticized for losing its identity, facing bans, and struggling to keep up with a rapidly evolving market that never slows down for anyone. To really understand how something this massive could even begin to fall, you first have to go back to where it all started. Because PUBG didn't just appear out of nowhere. It arrived at the perfect moment when gaming was desperate for something new. Back in 2017, most shooters were predictable, fast, and forgiving, built around quick respawns and low-risk gameplay that didn't really punish mistakes. PUBG changed that completely by introducing a brutal, high-stakes system where every match felt like it actually mattered, where one wrong decision could end 30 minutes of progress instantly, and where survival itself became the ultimate goal rather than just chasing kills. The concept was simple on paper. 100 players drop onto a massive map, loot whatever they can find, and fight until only one survives. But the execution was something no one had experienced before. It was slow, methodical, and filled with tension, forcing players to think about positioning, timing, and strategy in ways that most games never demanded. The quiet moments were just as intense as the gunfights because you never knew who was watching, who was listening, or when the next shot would come. That constant fear is what made PUBG different, and more importantly, what made it addictive. And the world responded instantly because within months of its release, PUBG exploded across platforms, dominating streaming platforms, social media, and gaming communities everywhere. By the end of 2017, it had sold over 30 million copies, becoming one of the fastest growing games of all time and essentially creating the battle royale genre as we know it today. It wasn't just another successful game, it was the blueprint that everyone else would try to follow. And for a moment, it looked like PUBG would stay on top forever. But then came the real turning point, March 2018, when PUBG Mobile launched and completely changed the scale of everything. This wasn't just a smaller version of the game. It was a full experience optimized for devices that millions of people already owned. Suddenly, the barrier to entry disappeared, and players who had never touched a gaming PC or console could now drop into the same intense battlegrounds using nothing more than a smartphone. This is where PUBG went from being a hit game to becoming a global movement. In regions like South Asia, Southeast Asia, and the Middle East, PUBG Mobile became more than just entertainment. It became a social platform, a competitive space, and in many cases, even an escape from real-world limitations. Friends formed squads, strangers became teammates, and entire communities were built around late-night matches and shared victories. Within just a few years, the game crossed 1 billion downloads, a number so massive that it redefined what success in gaming even looks like. What made PUBG Mobile even more powerful was how it balanced accessibility with depth, because even though anyone could pick it up and play, mastering it required skill, patience, and strategy. The realistic gun mechanics, the importance of sound, and the unpredictable nature of each match kept players engaged in a way that very few mobile games had ever achieved before. It wasn't just easy to start, it was difficult to truly master, and that combination is what kept players coming back. But while PUBG was dominating, the rest of the industry wasn't standing still, and this is where the cracks slowly began to form. Competitors started entering the scene with different approaches, faster gameplay, more frequent updates, and more visually dynamic experiences. Games like Fortnite, Warzone, and Apex Legends didn't just copy PUBG, they evolved the formula, making it more accessible, more exciting, and in some cases, more polished. This created a shift in player expectations because suddenly, slower and more tactical gameplay started to feel less appealing to audiences who were getting used to constant action and instant gratification. PUBG didn't necessarily become worse, It just didn't evolve as quickly as its competitors. And in a market that moves this fast, that alone can be enough to lose momentum. Players didn't leave all at once, but over time, curiosity turned into migration, and migration turned into permanent change. At the same time, PUBG was dealing with internal issues that made things even harder, including performance problems, bugs, and one of the biggest threats to any competitive game, cheating. Hackers became increasingly common, frustrating players and damaging the overall experience in ways that updates alone couldn't fully fix. Trust started to fade, and once players lose trust in a competitive environment, it becomes incredibly difficult to win them back. And to some extent, that criticism wasn't entirely wrong, because over time, PUBG Mobile began to introduce more cosmetics, collaborations, and features that moved away from its original gritty and realistic atmosphere. The game that once focused on survival and immersion started to feel more like a typical modern live service title, filled with flashy skins, limited-time events, and monetization systems designed to keep players spending as much as possible. But here's where things get more complicated, because while some players saw this as a decline, others saw it as growth, especially in the esports scene. PUBG Mobile Esports didn't just survive, it expanded, creating massive tournaments with millions of viewers and life-changing prize pools. For many young players, particularly in countries like Pakistan, this wasn't just a game anymore. It was an opportunity to build a career, gain recognition, and compete on a global stage. This is something that often gets overlooked when people talk about PUBG's fall, because while it may have lost its dominance in casual popularity, it gained something else, a deeply rooted competitive ecosystem that continues to thrive. Major tournaments now feature players from over 100 countries, proving that the game still holds a powerful position in the global esports landscape. So the real question isn't whether PUBG fell, but rather how we define success in the first place. Because if success means being the most popular game in the world, then yes, PUBG lost that title. But if success means longevity, impact, and the ability to adapt over time, then PUBG is still one of the most successful games ever created. The truth is, PUBG didn't simply rise and fall, it evolved, shifting from a revolutionary trendsetter into a more focused, niche experience that still holds value for millions of players around the world. It may not dominate headlines the way it once did, but its influence can still be seen in almost every battle royale game that exists today. And maybe that's the real legacy of PUBG, not just the numbers, not just the downloads, but the fact that it changed the direction of an entire industry. No, it proved that riskier, slower, and more tactical gameplay could succeed on a massive scale, and it showed that mobile gaming could compete with traditional platforms in ways no one had imagined before. So no, PUBG didn't just fall, and it definitely didn't disappear. It simply moved into a different phase of its life, one where survival matters more than dominance. And in a gaming world where trends come and go faster than ever, surviving for nearly a decade might actually be the biggest victory of all.